some armaments this morning because I've been traveling the past few months and I've been coughing for several weeks, but don't worry, I'm testing every day and I'm negative. I just would like to first of all, good morning. Good morning to SAIP, good morning to the partners, good morning to all the participants. Thank you Abdu, thank you John, thank you Kathy and the rest of the SAIP family for bringing us to Bangkok to share what we have done so far as the fight against disinformation is concerned. I'm with Board Member Jason Gonzalez of the province of Iloilo this morning. Board Member Jason has been on top of our efforts to fight disinformation. I'm also with Rafi Magno, who is Executive Director of Atty Incorporated, which is the NGO which carries our Angat Buhay program. I'm also with Attorney Stella Esquivias, who is Corporate Secretary of Angat Incorporated. So the four of us are very happy to be with you this morning. But just to give you context of what I will be discussing with you, this is actually, I'm no expert as far as disinformation is concerned. So I'm talking from the lens of somebody who has been at the receiving end of a lot of attacks the last 6 years. But after my term expired, we have been doing everything we can to fight smartly all that has been happening as far as the invasion of the digital space is concerned. So that's the fight that Board Member Jason is on top of. So what I will be discussing with you today is actually a collective effort of many people who has been working with us, who has been gathering information for us to be able to fight it in the manner that we should. We do not want to fight and fight in the wrong way because we might just contribute to the polarization that is already there. So recently I was in a conversation about farming. So all things farming. And a very interesting concept came up. One that I thought would provide a good understanding of how the flow of information, especially online, has been co-opted to push forward counter-democratic agendas. So I share this concept in the form of a question. What is the difference between conventional and organic farming? So maybe at the back of your minds, what has farming got to do with disinformation? But there are, of course, possible responses, and I am sure that those of you who dabble in agriculture will have an answer. So there is one difference that provides a particularly appropriate metaphor for our discussions today. So while conventional farming is concerned primarily with the plant, the organic farmer is concerned with the soil. Next slide, please. I would like to anchor our discussions today on this very analogy. Our challenges with number one, the spread of online lies. Number two, the dismantling of structures of meaningful discourse. And number three, the erosion of democracies all over the world, which are much more of the problem of the soil than of its plant, than it is of the plant. The architects of such a situation did not set out merely to disperse false narratives, because they knew that for such narratives to take root, the soil itself has to become toxic. They had to alter entire cultures and belief systems. And in doing so, the plant itself, the stories we tell ourselves and each other, the information we share, can become as toxic as the ground upon which they are planted. Next slide. So today, I will attempt to discuss the phenomenon along two lines of inquiry. First, what happened and why and how. In gaining an understanding of the mechanisms that brought us to the current situation, we might find the clarity necessary to answer the second question. And the second question is, what can be done? Meaning, what strategies might we adopt? How might we modify our approach so that we may truly arrive at a long-term solution? And that's what we are after here. One that can detoxify the soil and establish a healthier public discourse. In short, how to build a disinformation resilient culture. Next slide. To answer the first question of how our current situation came to be, we need to look no further than the story of the Philippines over the past several years. In their groundbreaking study called Architects of Disinformation, Behind the Scenes of Troll Accounts and Fake News in the Philippines, Professor Jonathan Ong and his colleagues unmasked an entire industry that has exploited the online space to push forward political agendas. Number one, advertising and PR executives who engage political actors. Number two, mid-level operators who execute strategies and distill them into central messages. And number three, rank and file army of trolls with several fake accounts, this much we already know, who apply their creative energies to distributing these messages across the online space. It is these trolls that have infiltrated communities, pages, and groups in the Philippines. What are they doing? They seed memes and messages. Number two, they reshare talking points from so-called influencers. Number three, they tap on reactions. These are the likes and the hearts and everything else. And number four, commenting on each other, sometimes with copy-pasted texts, driving up engagements and thus the virality of specific online content. I'm sure you have seen this when you use social media. But the study says they are organized, they have set strategies and objectives, and they are well-funded, very well-funded. They have shattered social media as a space for political discourse in the Philippines. Next slide. And they are not yet done. In another recently released study, this was released when I was in Harvard, and I was made one of the reactors of the presentation of the second study. Professor Ong and his co-authors identified worrying trends. The intensity, the volume, and the sophistication of these architects have reached unprecedented heights. Professor Ong and his colleagues introduced a broader term for this phenomenon, and the term is influence operations, emphasizing its expansion from merely seeding and spreading lies to constructing an entire ecosystem that can manipulate perceptions and even values and belief systems. They mobilize an entire cast of characters to achieve their goals, and these are examples of the characters identified by Professor Ong and his colleagues, which the influence operations have mobilized. Number one, the knowledge influencer. And the knowledge influencer is often credentialed or at least recognized as an expert and who affirms biases rather than invites critical reflection. We have a number of this in the Philippines. Number two, the satirist, often in a position of access and power, who delivers coded attacks that can transcend fact checks. So because it's satire, it transcends fact checks. And number three, I think only Filipinos will be able to understand this, the AFAM reactors. AFAM is a term for attractive foreigners in the Philippines, but they are also being used to lighten up political issues, and they serve as a counterpoint to the often distressing responses that the attacks elicit. When you look at all the troll pages, there are a lot of these AFAM reactors in them. Next slide. They have also expanded their platforms from a heavily Facebook or YouTube-oriented approach in the past years to the use of new social media such as TikTok, and even hyper-partisanship broadcast media in what the authors describe as the Fox musification of the Philippine media. Again, to the Filipinos here, you will know which media networks we are referring to. So through it all, the polarity manifests through practices that have become a common response to these influence operations. Number one, brigading, which grants the mob a sense of gratification but does little to address the root causes of their frustrations. And number two, canceling. Cancel culture has been very prevalent in the Philippines right now, and it's being done by all camps. So canceling, where those who seek accountability turn to rituals that often lead to othering rather than genuine understanding. Next slide, please. So for sure, there are certain conditions that allow the industry of disinformation and influence operations to thrive in the Philippines. And allow me to cite two important concepts connected to this. First is algorithmic bias. Scrolling over your feed, a user cannot possibly see everything that his friends list has posted. And even if you could, you would have to wonder, how come some are seen first? Have you ever wondered about that? What determines the order of priority? Which posts are privileged and thus appear on top? This bias, determined by algorithms, is encoded into the very DNA of social media platforms. There are strong indications that there is a privilege accorded to posts that elicit explosive emotions, all the more to keep people glued to their screens. But in their defense, Facebook has said that this is not the case. But unless the process, the code itself that determines such privileging becomes offered for public scrutiny, there is no way to tell. Regardless of what this algorithmic bias is, the fact is that it exists, but that it has been gained by actors to serve political ends. I'm not sure if you read already about the two legislations passed in the EU, where there is exacting of accountability to social media platforms, requiring them to be more transparent on their algorithms. So we are waiting with bated breath how they will be able to implement this groundbreaking legislations. So next slide. The second concept is called net neutrality. The idea that all data that traverses the internet should be treated the same. After all, they are just packets of zeros and ones. Enforcing net neutrality means that service providers should ensure that so long as you are connected to the internet, everything should be accessible for the same cost at the same speed. There is no net neutrality in the Philippines. For the Filipinos here, we all know that our telcos package games, messaging platforms, and most importantly, social media platforms into their plans and data promos. So you will see on the screen all the offers of our telcos. So Facebook, there is free Facebook, there is free everything, because this is a coupon of the telcos, so that they will get more subscribers compared to the other telcos. So this means that the everyday user can sign in for just a few pesos and enjoy, for example, Facebook for free. Free access to social media can seem like a nice deal until one realizes that since Facebook is free and news sites like Google, and some other sites are not, then regulators have handed over a near monopoly on the flow of information to these platforms that have algorithmic bias and can be gamed. So this process ultimately crowds out legitimate media, and we have seen that in the Philippines. From the communication space, it grants the influencers and the trolls, whose loyalties lie with the highest bidder, the same if not more latency than traditional sources of information. Trained journalists who subscribe to a certain code of ethics in their practice. There's none on social media. Volume becomes the name of the game. So everything is measured according to the number of likes or the number of reactions that each post gets, rather than truth or reliability. While net neutrality was cast aside without much resistance in the Philippines, the debate is much more intense elsewhere in the world. In 2018, for example, India adopted what some have called the strongest net neutrality norms in the world. This was a product of years-long struggle by advocates who successfully blocked telcos and tech giants such as Facebook and Google from offering free access to a limited number of websites, which would have allowed them to control the flow of information in one of the most populous countries in the world. Next slide. On top of all this, for the Philippines, the promise of democracy, inclusiveness and equality, progress and social mobility remains in the horizon. My country is hardly unique in this regard. Throughout our history, despite efforts from the ranks of reformists, from civil society, and the occasional leader who had both vision and compassion, political and economic power has been concentrated in the hands of the well-connected, well-off, well-educated few. And in a society where such a cleavage exists, frustrations with the system, with those who hold power, and whom one might consider elite, will likewise abound. These frustrations were intensified by design and weaponized by bad actors who were able to build an entire apparatus of trolls and influencers who can gain the biases of a profit-oriented social media ecosystem. Next slide, please. So as we unravel the mechanisms that corrupted online public discourse, one thing becomes clear. The lies and hate exist in a continuum. Our challenges go beyond the information that is being spread. It is also about the manner with which it is being spread and the emotions that it elicits among those who consume it. So polarities, and this is also part of the study conducted by Jonathan Ong and his colleagues. Polarities are not a mere byproduct, but a part of the grand design to heighten social tension and erode the very practice of social discourse. So when discussions of national importance cannot be had without degenerating it into us versus them matches, then the populist authoritarian can swoop in. So it has been very easy for populist authoritarian leaders to capture the hearts and the imagination of people because everything has been so polarized already. They have stopped listening to each other. So next slide. It is from the wreckage of these conditions that we now ask ourselves, what can be done? So for certain, steps have already been taken. In the Philippines, much work has been done, not only since the elections of 2022, but even before that. Led by media practitioners, some of them are here this morning, led by media practitioners, historians, the academe and civil society, media literacy initiatives have been underway in the Philippines for the past several years. Number one, there have been constant calls to support credible media, and SITE has been very helpful in this regard. And connected to this, there has been a constant push towards educating information consumers on how to spot fake news and historical distortionism. And number 3, there have been a lot of efforts to investigate and expose the apparatus that has co-opted the flow of information that have been so constant. So we all know Filipino Nobel laureate Maria Ressa. Maria Ressa and her colleagues at Rappler were among the very first of the many journalists who joined the multi-sectoral collaboration Facts First PH. For the Filipinos here, you might have heard of Facts First PH already. Months leading to the 2022 elections. Through this, civil society groups acted as a distribution channel for credible information, lending humanity, relatability, and connection to the facts being brought into public spaces. So you will see on the screen the flow of the collaboration leading to the 2022 elections, which was spearheaded by Facts First PH. So alongside, the academic churned out research after research duly presented to the public, while lawyers and legal groups work together for strategic and tactical litigation to help protect journalists and academics. This is an effort that needs time to ripen and gain greater impact, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. Next slide. Last year, Maria Ressa also published a 10-point agenda to rally people to the cause. It contained a clear challenge to uphold net neutrality and make the marketplace of ideas more fair, so that information can be subjected to scrutiny and that the truth might come out on top. Maria Ressa, we all know, is herself a journalist, but parsing her points, we see an understanding that the work of counter-disinformation involves much more than truth-telling. While some of the points are rightfully about protecting the rights of journalists, she also challenges regulators and policymakers to shift mindsets, and in doing so, address root causes of disinformation. And among the more important points involve, number 1, viewing disinformation as having an impact on human rights. And number 2, protecting data privacy and banning the surveillance advertising, which tracks our activities online and uses disinformation to predict behavior and create hyper-targeted ads. We all know that this has been happening for a very long time. I hope I get to finish this with my voice there. So, next slide. Oh, is that a correct one? So, as I have pointed out, important steps have so far been taken. And one can only imagine how much worse things could have been had there not been any pushback from those who care about the truth. There is a palpable sense of people coming together, of people looking for and working towards solutions. But at the same time, one cannot deny that it seems that we are forever on the defensive. So have you felt that? We are just very reactive. We have just been on the defensive, forever scrambling, forever climbing uphill. Such a feeling affirms the truth of a bigger challenge ahead. Because while all of the efforts so far are necessary, there is a need to accept the reality that there is a need to do more than safeguard our information spaces. The task is not merely to protect the truth, because at this point, majority of our people already believe the lies. So what is there to protect? People already bought into their narratives. So disinformation and influence operations is not merely a threat. It has arrived. And there is a case to be made that it has already won. Insofar as its goals are concerned, as Professor Ong and his colleagues conclude, The Philippines is now a nation split into camps and echo chambers. Again, the Filipinos will be able to relate. Sometimes split into colors. Segments of society exist with their own facts, with their own experts, their own narrative of Philippine history and society. An alternate reality has already been created, one which seems impenetrable and impervious to logic, where those who pull the strings can do no wrong. So it seems that we are sleepwalking towards a new incarnation of autocracy, one that in fact acquired a mandate under the illusion of electoral choice. So next slide. If such is the case, then merely telling people they are wrong only drives them further away. This is so because they are already well entrenched within a new belief system. One, can we go back to the former slide? Yeah. This is so because they are already well entrenched within a new belief system. One that has tapped into their frustrations and turned them into values, that has created a compelling narrative with protagonists and villains, and that has led them to believe in the shared purpose of toppling or at least directing their anger towards a system that for so long has denied them their due. One that has a vocal community of influencers and that has a constant barrage of new information to keep them believing. So this is the new belief system that has been formed amongst us. So next slide, please. The more important question, therefore, is how to dislodge this belief system. How to shake people into wakefulness if we have been sleepwalking. And allow them to rediscover the values that will allow the truth to prevail. The question is, how do we fix the soil? So by no means do I claim that we have an answer to that question. But whatever the playbook may be, whatever strategies it might contain, I am certain that the first step is to understand our people, particularly the values that they still hold dear, values that could underpin a belief system based on truth-telling. So only then can we break down the current polarities and bridge the hyper-partisanship cleavage that has come to characterize society. And I was reminded, that explains the picture, I was reminded of this imperative October of last year at the November of last year, at the Obama Foundation Forum in New York, where I shared the stage with a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, a tech company CEO, and academics to talk about democracy and disinformation. We spent some time going through the technicalities of the problem, how algorithms change behaviors, and the possible dangers in the recent shake-up at Twitter. But amid all of that, we shared one common view, that there is a need for public spaces where ideas, especially lies, are challenged, where debates are healthy, and where courtesy and understanding thrive despite disagreements, because we seem to have lost all that. The key, we all agreed, was community, the willingness to work together towards a common goal, putting the greater good above all else. Because what is happening now is that we have our own belief systems already. We have our own truths. So what is true in this community is not true in the other community. So to put it simply, if the grand is not true in the other community. So to put it simply, if the grand strategy of those who spread lies is to stop us from talking to each other as citizens of goodwill, then our goal must be to have people talk to each other again with enough goodwill and trust, and with an awareness that we all share one world. if disinformation wants to prevent consensus and has eroded the spaces that allow for such a consensus to be built, then the first step for us should be either repair those spaces or build new ones. Next slide. This was one of the animating insights of the campaign we ran last year, and we sought to operationalize it through a strategy called Radical Love. For the Filipinos here, you heard me talk often about Radical Love. Radical Love is a concept adapted from the Turkish opposition, who proposed more patient and sincere forms of communication. The cardinal principle which we hope to transplant in the Philippines was, in Turkey, it was ignore Erdogan, but love those who love him. Difficult to do. It calls on the ranks to talk about concrete issues that are important to the community, to use language that is inclusionary, calm, and often humorous, and to treat everyone, even those who might stand across the political divide, with kindness and dignity. So in our People's Campaign last year, Radical Love inspired a movement built on volunteerism, kindness, creativity, and joy. We were partly successful, but because of the hyperpolarity, it has been difficult for our supporters to practice radical love, even if it is something that we continue to talk about each and every chance we got. But it inspired the spirit of generosity, you will agree, and created a deep sense of responsibility for each other as our rallies grew bigger. It tapped into a willingness to extend a hand even to those who supported other candidates. So we did house-to-house campaigns, going to houses with our opponents' tarps outside of them. During rallies, we have seen how people were so generous, not just of themselves, but of everything else. Starting the conversation by actively listening and building the truth, not as a weapon, but as a gift to one another. So next slide. This approach, of course, requires some behavior change, not only inducing it externally to audiences who have already been co-opted, but also among our ranks, internally, among reformists who by necessity often have to work within spaces of tension. In this, partners from the private sector, the academia, the media, civil society play a very important role. We must explore and perhaps take it upon ourselves to recalibrate our rhetoric so that it foregrounds common hopes and interests. Which means that as we turn down the noise on fake news, we must also sharpen focus on new and compelling narratives that could find alignments among our values and those we wish to convince. This was where we failed miserably in the past. We were just defending, but we were not putting out narratives. We were not putting out positive narratives based on the basic values that Filipinos hold dear. If those who wield influence are successful in doing so, then perhaps the rest of our ranks will follow suit. So it is an aspiration. It is a hope that what we started during the campaign for radical love, will snowball, because the aspiration is that it will be the vehicle for which we might be able to push more positive narratives and fight the flow of disinformation. So next slide, please. So allow me to summarize the imperatives we have so far sketched out in response to our second line of inquiry. What can be done? And we are thick in that particular regard. I was telling you a while ago that board member Jason has that particular group. We have so far brought to the same table representatives from the academe, representatives from the church, representatives from business and from civil society, hoping that we can all work together. So first, turn down the noise. Stem the further spread of disinformation, protect our truths, and keep our ranks from being further thinned. This is done through, number one, continuing the media literacy and educational campaigns that have so far been run. Number two, increasing the awareness on the apparatus, on the entire architecture, on the puppet masters behind influence operations. Number three, revisiting the effects of social media advertising, particularly hyper-targeted ads on our rights. And number four, inducing policy reform, whether through applying pressure on the platforms themselves or lobbying government to enact policies that allow for the freer flow of information, such as those that concern net neutrality. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of bills on this yet filed before the Philippine Congress. We are hoping that legislations we started with the EU already, but legislations in the EU, in the US, and some other countries would already be passed, so that our own Congress will follow suit. As many have pointed out, however, much of this is already well underway. I have discussed the initiatives that have been started before the campaign to truly find a sustainable solution to disrupt the continuum of lies and hate, and to ultimately fix the soil, so to speak. We must sharpen our focus on what our people truly need to hear, and this is the pushing of narratives, reminding people of our values as a Filipino. So we must understand the values and belief systems of our people, understand their frustrations. This is very, very important, so that we may likewise craft new, more hopeful narratives based on the truth. Create more spaces where trust and goodwill may thrive, therefore dismantling the echo chambers built upon anger and divisiveness. And number four, recalibrate rhetoric, so that it does not drive people further away from each other, but instead foregrounds our commonalities. This is the problem with just being on the defensive. Because sometimes, most of the time, your actions do not really give long-term solutions to problems, but just drive people away. So, next slide. It will take much effort to transform these imperatives and philosophies into actual action plans. But I know for a fact that many volunteers in the Philippines are already hard at work, building networks, activating communities, drawing up strategies, and piloting these strategies so that we may mount a more organized, concerted push to reclaim public discourse and reestablish truth-telling as a foundation of our democracy. If you look at the screen, one part of that is Angat Buhay, which we are already doing with Rafi and Stella. Angat Buhay is, the aspiration for Angat Buhay is that it is going to be a platform where people can continue to be engaged and collaborate. But the second half of the screen is Build Pilipinas. This was actually a continuation of the Team Leni and Robredo for the Filipinos here. If you're familiar with Team Leni and Robredo, that's the team of volunteers we had during the campaign. We're starting to convert them not just into Angat Buhay implementers, but we're starting to convert them into volunteer groups actively fighting, not just disinformation, but all that has been happening as far as the communication space is concerned. So Build Pilipinas is headed by a board member, Jason, but it's actually a conglomeration of many different groups. And the main purpose is really reclaiming our public spaces and making people talk to each other again. So I think this is going to be the last slide. Second to the last slide or last slide. So it will take much effort to transform these imperatives and philosophies into, no, I'm done with it already. When I speak from my own experience in the Philippines, it has been pointed out many times before that guarding information spaces is not merely a local concern. It is happening all over. In the Global South, where frustrations from histories of inequality and operations have been sent to overdrive, and even in more progressive societies like the US, where other cleavages, whether of race, creed, or identity, have been exploited. It is my hope that through discussions such as this, where people from different contexts, different countries come together, can move us towards a sustainable strategy to rebuild the structures for meaningful public discourse online. So after all, at the heart of the challenges in today's age of information is the creeping sentiment of being disanchored, being adrift, that perhaps too many things are happening and too much about our future is uncertain. So we must therefore take it upon ourselves, those of us who stand for democracy, for truth, for fairness and justice, to establish a sense of certainty over what is perhaps most important, most human truth of all, that none of us is ever alone. So thank you to SITE for bringing everyone together. Hopefully the product of this discussion will lead us a step closer to our dream of finally come together and look for more long-term solutions in protecting and reclaiming back our communication spaces. Mabuhay po kayong lahat.